It was around 2007 that I actually, almost by accident, discovered the film Ravished Armenia. So the film that was made in 1919 based on the true story of genocide survivor Aurora Mardiganian. The film was at that time a 90-minute film and had actually two titles. It was either called Ravished Armenia or Auction of Souls. For so many years, we felt that there were no representation. I'm thinking about, of course, cinematic representation of the Armenian genocide. So discovering the work that Aurora Mardiganian did, the fact that she played actually in the very first film in the history of cinema that depicts genocide, and the very first film about the Armenian genocide, was, of course, a very important moment for us. The film was a collaboration with a humanitarian organization, the Near Eastern Relief, and the idea of working together with Hollywood was actually to raise awareness and to raise money. And actually it raised a lot of money, and it enabled to help a lot of Armenian orphans. It was probably that collaboration that made the film so impactful. Because how could you really touch the American audience with an event that was not just unknown, but also with a culture that was completely stranger and other to the American audience? Of course, the Christian affiliation was very important. It was easier for the American audience to identify with Christian victims. And that element, by the way, was very much emphasized in the film. But the challenge was also to empathize with the Armenian victims, to feel close to them, to create a feeling of solidarity. What I find absolutely fascinating about that film, if we think about representation of mass violence today, is the graphic, explicit depiction of everything that we would imagine or not be able to imagine in genocide, like rape, abduction, torture, starvation, all kinds of mass killings, mass burning, deportation, etc., etc. Those were all depicted in the film. So it was literally showing the unimaginable, and people had to believe that because that was a true story. And I really want to emphasize here this idea of the unimaginable, because it was such a big thing that people who attended the screening would even doubt what they were watching. They even thought it could have been an invention. And I think if you would question young filmmakers about how they would do that today, I'm not even sure they would be so graphic or they would be so explicit that they would think it's appropriate to do that. But at that time, Hollywood understood really well that it was very important to be extremely explicit, to be very vocal, visually vocal, of course, about a silent film, about what it entails and what sort of atrocity the Armenian people were actually enduring at the beginning of the 20th century. One of the practices that was very much used in the early days of American cinema is that when the film was shown and screened, very often eyewitnesses were invited to introduce and frame the film. Because the tricky thing, of course, is that here we're talking about a feature film, what could be called an epic melodrama film, but actually completely based on the reality of the event itself, based on the true story of Aurora. So it was important at that time to also push the veracity of the film a little bit further than just by the screening itself. It has to be framed, it has to be contextualized. I find this point really important to stress still today, because does it really change in all these years? I think that's where the film is still very relevant to discuss in today's context. It's very hard for filmmakers, writers, artists, etc., to address the Armenian genocide without adding the level of historical veracity, without being caught in that position of, what you see there on screen, it did really happen. The film widely circulated in the major cities in the US, outside of the US, in Europe, in South America, etc. It was indeed a huge success that raised a lot of awareness and money at that time. But all of that somehow was very quickly forgotten. The film completely disappeared and resurfaced, but in a very fragmented way, probably in the 90s. There is a very troubling analogy between the lost and the forgotten genocide and the lost and the forgotten film. On the one hand, we have materials, and to start with the script. So the script, of course, enables us to identify what we see of those remaining images and fragments of the film. So we have the memoir and the script. We also have photographic images from the set. We have the interview she conducted for the Zorion Institute in the 80s. But there is still so much we don't know. And I think that's what is, on the one hand, very frustrating, but also make us really wonder about all the things that need to be done about this film. Yes, of course, the way they were making this film was maybe particular of that time and unthinkable today. But at the same time, we can also wonder about the different iteration and the different way it actually still resonates so much with what we're witnessing today. About media and activism, about the difficulty of representing mass atrocities, about the fact that, yes, indeed, creating or producing awareness about atrocity is not just something about this generation. And I think this is also a way to teach about this film, of course, we can learn a lot of things about the practice of American early cinema, but also about this, again, ongoing difficulty about addressing genocide through images, through cinema, and through media for the younger generations.